Wyoming Territory, 1874. The wind howled through the broken ribs of an old barn near the edge of Sheridan, and that was where she chose to sleep. Juna Rowell had not spoken to another soul in 4 days. She lay curled beneath a threadbare quilt she had not made, in a barn that was not hers, with a heart that had never once belonged to anyone for long. Her boots were still damp from the rain, and her hands trembled as she pressed them to her chest. She had stopped counting the miles since leaving Montana. All she knew was that folks died around her, and she had no place left to run. The last person who had tried to help her, an old widow who offered her bread and a cot, had fallen down her cellar steps and snapped her neck before the day was done. The town whispered. Juna heard them. They did not even try to whisper quietly. She was cursed. That was what they said. And maybe she was. Her parents died when she was 10. Her older brother vanished into the war and never came back. Her first fiancé collapsed in the middle of a dance. The second one rode off and was found mauled by wolves 3 days later. So Juna ran. She always ran. The barn door creaked open, letting in a shaft of pale morning light and a gust of cold air. She sat up fast, heart thudding, fingers closing around the handle of the small knife she kept near. A tall man stood in the doorway, silhouetted in the light. He had a broad chest beneath a dust-worn coat, a battered hat pulled low, and a rifle slung across his back. His boots were clean but worn. He did not speak right away. Just watched her. "You planning to rob me or just passing through?" he asked finally, voice rough as gravel but not unkind. "I am not robbing anyone," Juna said, pushing herself to her feet. "I just needed somewhere dry." The man stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. He looked around the empty barn like he half expected someone else to appear. "This place has been empty 8 years, he said. "You picked a quiet corner of the world to disappear to." "I am not disappearing," she said. He tilted his head. "You sure?" Juna swallowed. Her throat ached from not speaking. "You are not going to run me off?" "Not unless you give me reason to," he said. "Name's Varen Judd." She blinked. "Why would you let me stay?" "Because you look like you have not slept in a real bed in a long time. And because you were shivering. I am not your problem." "Maybe not. But you were in my barn and it would not sit right with me to turn you out without knowing why." She hesitated. "Then, my name is Juna Rowell." His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "You hungry, Juna?" She hated how that question made her throat tighten. "Yes." Varen brought her to his cabin a half-mile from the barn, tucked against a low ridge of pines. It was modest but warm. There was a stone hearth, a heavy table worn by years of meals, and 2 chairs, one of which had clearly not been used in a long time. He poured her coffee and laid out bread and beans like it was nothing. She ate in silence, but he did not press her. He just sat in the other chair and fixed the strap on his rifle. She watched how his fingers moved, quick, deft, quiet. "I do not usually do this," she said finally. "Eat. Let people help me." He looked up. "Well, you are doing all right at it. You do not know what happens to people who help me." He leaned back, the firelight brushing his jaw, catching in the ends of his sun-bleached hair. "What happens?" "They die." He was quiet. Then he said, "Everyone dies. Not like this. Not this fast. Not this certain." "You think you are cursed?" She stared at the flames. "I know I am." Varen stood. For a moment, she thought he was going to tell her to leave. But instead, he went to a shelf, pulled down a jar of honey, and set it beside her plate. "What's that for?" "Bread tastes better with it." She looked up at him. "You do not believe me." "No," he said. "I believe you believe it. That is enough." Over the next few days, she helped him around the place. She cleaned out the barn, patched the hole in the roof, cooked meals when he worked the fence line. She gathered eggs from chickens that seemed to know her better than she knew herself. He never asked for anything in return, just worked beside her like she had always been there. One afternoon, as they hauled firewood to the stack near the porch, she tripped on a root and fell hard. Varen was at her side in a second, hands on her arms, helping her up. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, brushing off her skirt. "You should not touch me." "Why?" "Because something bad will happen." He looked at her, then really looked. "Something bad already happened to you, Juna." but nothing about you feels cursed to me. She stared at him, breath caught. His hand was still on her arm. She didn't pull away. That night, a storm rolled in. She lay awake on the cot he had made up for her, watching the shadows shift across the cabin walls. Wind rattled the shutters. Rain drummed the roof. She thought of all the people who had touched her life and vanished. And now Varen. Kind. Steady. Unafraid. She sat up, heart twisting. She could not lose him too. She rose and crossed to the door of his room. Knocked once, soft. Varen? A pause. Then, you all right? She opened the door. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirt off, boots beside the nightstand. He stood when he saw her. I cannot sleep, she said. He nodded. Storm's loud. I am scared. He stepped closer. Not touching. Just near. You do not need to be scared here. What if I bring it with me? The bad luck. I do not believe in curses. You should, she whispered. He reached out slowly and cupped her face with one calloused hand. I have been alone a long time too, Juna, and I see a lot of things when I look at you, but none of them are curses. Her eyes welled. What do you see? Blessings, he said. All over you. She let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. And then he kissed her. Slow, careful, like she might break. She kissed him back with all the aching fear in her chest. And nothing bad happened. Not then. Not after. In the weeks that followed, the fear did not vanish, but it quieted. Varen never rushed her. Never asked for more than she could give. But he was always there. Steady. Warm. Real. One morning, she woke beside him. His arm heavy across her waist. His face soft with sleep. She watched him breathe, and for the first time in her life, she felt something stronger than fear. Hope, she whispered. You should have run when you found me. His eyes opened slowly. Not a chance. She smiled. You are a fool. Maybe, but I am your fool now. And she believed him. The creek east of the pasture had thawed sooner than they expected. Varen stood knee-deep in icy water, coaxing a broken fence post upright while Juna steadied the beam from the bank. Mud sucked at her boots, cold seeping through her hem, but her hands didn't shake anymore. Not from fear, anyhow. You ever set a brace wire? He asked, not looking up. No, she said, but I can learn. He passed her the pliers without a word. She took them, fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, but her body remembered it long after. She twisted the wire taut, bracing her foot against a stone while he hammered the post firm. The sound echoed sharp across the valley, startling a hawk from the cottonwoods. When they finished, he stood back, brushing dirt from his palms. You learn fast. I had to. She wiped a smear of rust on her skirt. There wasn't anyone else to show me how to fix things. Not after. Well, not after. He picked up the coil of leftover wire. You want to know something strange? She looked at him. He was squinting into the sun, the wind tugging at the bandana around his throat. I don't think you broke anything by coming here. She said nothing, only watched the creek slide by, pale blue and cold as bone. You didn't bring ruin, he continued. You helped mend a fence. That's not the same. It's more than most folks manage. They walked back together, the tools between them in a rough canvas sack. The silence was easier now, the kind that held space rather than emptiness. That evening, she found a wooden box tucked behind the hearth. Inside lay strips of rawhide, a broken bridle, and a scattering of unpolished turquoise pieces. She turned one over in her hand, the stone rough and warm from the fire. Where did these come from? Varen looked up from where he was oiling the door hinges. A friend. Long gone now. Apache? He nodded once. He taught me how to braid horsehair. Said it gave your hands purpose. She set the stone down gently. Did he teach you how to be kind, too? No, Varen said, setting aside the oil tin. That was my mother. She died birthing my sister. Pa raised us both. Not gently, but fair. She glanced over. Where's your sister now? In Cheyenne. Married a printer, says the ink ruins his hands but not his pride. Do you miss her? Every season. His gaze softened. But I'd rather know she's safe than near. You ever feel that way about anyone? Juna thought of her brother's last letter, pages stained from where she'd read it too many times in the rain. She nodded slowly. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" she asked. "I've stopped thinking in directions," he said. "Forward's enough." She smiled at that. "Forward's hard. So is staying in place." Later, he sat at the table carving a length of cedar into a spoon. She watched from the hearth, knees drawn to her chest, a thin shawl draped over her shoulders. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Do you want me to?" "No," she said. "That's not why I asked." His knife paused. "Then why?" "Because I need to know if I can stay." He turned the spoon in his hand as if weighing more than just wood. "This place doesn't ask anything of you," he said. "It just gives what it can." "Like you do." She crossed to the table and sat across from him. "I don't want to be a burden." He held the spoon between them. "You're not. You're a bomb." She stared at the cedar grain, heart thickening behind her ribs. "You don't know all the things I've done to survive." "I don't need to," he said. "You're here now." And she believed him. Not because he said it, but because he lived it every quiet act, every offered piece of warmth, every steady morning beside her in the cold Wyoming light. Outside, the wind turned. Snow would come again before spring, but inside the cabin, the fire held. By late March, the ground softened enough for planting. Varen turned the soil behind the cabin while Juna leaned over a low bench, pressing onion sets into shallow furrows. Her braid had come loose, a few strands sticking to her cheek with sweat and wind. He watched her a moment too long before lifting the spade again. "You ever grow anything before?" he asked, steadying his boot on the blade. "Wild herbs," she said, brushing dirt from her fingers. "Out near the bitter roots. My mother taught me which ones healed and which ones lied." Lied. Some plants pretend to be helpful, but they twist the stomach or fog the mind. You have to pay attention. He leaned on the spade. "Sounds like people." She straightened, brushing her palms on her skirt. "People are harder. They smile while they lie." He turned back to the soil, but his voice had gone quieter. "That happened to you?" She nodded once, then knelt to tamp the earth around a row of radish seeds. They worked in silence after that, broken only by the steady scrape of steel on dirt and birdsong in the cottonwoods. When the last seed was buried and the tools wiped clean, they sat on the porch steps, boots muddy, hands scratched. Varen tipped his hat back. "You ever picture what you'd do if the fear left you?" She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I don't know. I've never thought that far ahead." "Try." She glanced sideways at him. "I'd build something, not just survive. Maybe raise chickens. Trade eggs for sugar. Learn to sew proper seams, not just patch holes." He nodded, chin tilted toward the fields. "You'd be good at steady things." "What about you?" she asked. "What would you do if you weren't waiting for something to fall apart?" "I'd carve more. Make things with my hands that didn't need to be fixed or fed. Maybe build another room on the cabin." "For what?" He looked at her then, eyes steady. "Company." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "You think you could live that way with someone beside you?" "I reckon I already do." She stood up too fast, heart thudding. "I need to check the hens." "They'll wait," he said gently. "I won't." But she didn't walk far. Just to the edge of the field, where the stalks of last year's corn stood like ghosts. She rested her hand on the fence rail and closed her eyes. "I'm not used to being wanted past a night," she said, not expecting him to follow. "I'm not after a night," he said behind her. "I'm after all of it." Her throat ached. "You don't know what that means. I break things. People. I don't mean to, but then let me carry some of that weight." She turned, tears starting to spite herself. "Why?" "Because I see you," he said. "And I want to keep seeing you. Not the stories you tell yourself. Not the ones others left behind." She pressed a hand to her chest. "I don't know how to be safe." "That's all right," he murmured, stepping close. "I know how to build fences." That night, she sat at his workbench, watching him carve a handle from ashwood. Her hands rested still, not clenched. The oil lamp hissed softly, shadows moving along the log walls. He didn't ask her to speak or to stay. He just worked, steady as always, and made room for her in the hush. And when she reached out, touched his wrist, and leaned her head against his shoulder, he didn't startle. He only set the handle aside and wrapped his arm around her like he'd been waiting to do it for years. She whispered, "I think I might be unlearning the fear." He kissed her hair. "Then you're growing something new." And she believed him. By mid-April, the first shoots broke through the thawed soil, thin, green signs of a season trying to keep its promise. Juna stood barefoot in the dirt before sunrise, toes sinking into the damp earth, breath clouding the still air. She didn't pray, not aloud, but she closed her eyes and let her thoughts settle like silt in a slow river. The barn door groaned behind her. "You left your boots by the stove again," Varen said, holding them by their worn laces. She turned, brushing a streak of soil from her wrist. "I wanted to feel the ground." He set the boots down beside the fence post. "You always wake this early?" "Only when I think something good might happen." He leaned against the gate, arms crossed. "You think that now?" "I'm trying to." She bent to gather her dress hem, slipping one foot into the boot. "It doesn't come easy. You're not someone who does things easy." She looked up sharply, but his tone held no mockery, only a quiet kind of admiration. They walked the pasture's edge without speaking. The creek had darkened with snowmelt, and the cottonwoods held a sheen of pale green. Varen led them uphill where the scrub gave way to a narrow outcrop of stone. When they reached the top, he pointed toward the valley below. "You see that patch of flat land near the bend?" She nodded, squinting against the morning light. "Used to be a crow hunting camp there," he said. "My father told me stories about it. He said the ground remembers things even when people forget. That's why it stays open, no trees, no brush, just grass that grows low and soft." Juna knelt beside a juniper bush, fingers brushing needles. "Do you believe that? That land holds memory." He crouched beside her. "I haven't decided. But I figure if it's true, then this land remembers you now." She didn't answer right away. A hawk circled wide above them, riding a current without moving its wings. "I used to think I could only belong somewhere if I earned it," she said. "If I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, kept my head down." "You don't owe this place anything," he said. "You just have to stay." She looked over at him, the wind tugging curls loose from her braid. "And if I can't? Then I'll go with you." Her breath hitched. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've lived quiet. I've lived careful. But I'd rather take the risk than go back to a house with only echoes in it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. She took it, unfolding the linen to reveal a carved pendant strung on leather. "It's not much," he said. "But it's yours. Made it from that cedar we hauled last month." She ran her thumb over the grain, her mouth parting slightly. "You made this for me?" "I did." "What does it mean?" He met her eyes. "It means I see you. All of you." The wind shifted. She stood and tied the leather around her neck, her hands steady. "Then I'll stay," she said. "Not because I'm not afraid, but because I want to see what happens when I stop running." Varen rose, brushing dust from his trouser knees. "Then we'll build for that." They walked back to the cabin in no hurry, the sky warming behind them. Inside, she sat at the table and began stitching a strip of muslin into the start of a curtain. He read aloud from a book with fraying binding, pausing to laugh at the old-fashioned phrasing. That night, when she pulled the quilt over her knees and settled beside him in bed, she didn't flinch when he took her hand. "I used to believe I was cursed," she whispered. He pressed a kiss to her palm. "I still see blessings." And she believed him. The last frost broke in early May. Varen built a cradle. He didn't mention it to Juna at first, just worked on it in the lean to beside the barn during long dusks while she shelled peas or mended her only summer blouse. The cradle wasn't for now. It was for later. For a future he was still learning to believe in, but one he'd started shaping the moment she said she'd stay. One afternoon, she found him sanding the curved rockers, cedar dust clinging to his sleeves. She didn't ask what it was for. Her hands slid along the smoothed edge, and her smile told him she already knew. "I'm not with child," she said softly. "I know." Her fingers traced the joinery at the base. But you're still building it. He set the plane down. Because you deserve a life where you can expect things, not just endure them. She blinked, eyes wet but not sad. I've never expected anything good. Then let's make a habit of it. They didn't talk more about it. Didn't need to. That same week, they rode into town together for the first time. Sheridan had grown since Varen last passed through more clapboard storefronts, a new church steeple, a schoolhouse rising on the east edge. Juna kept close to his side, her hand brushing his coat each time they stepped off a boardwalk or passed a wagon. Inside the general store, she moved carefully through the aisles, touching bolts of fabric, running her thumb over jars of preserves she hadn't tasted in years. Varen traded for seed potatoes and a length of fence wire. She bought a tin of lemon salve and a comb with carved teeth. When they stepped outside, she turned her face toward the sun. I used to dread towns, she said. Too many eyes. Too many questions. No one asked anything today. They didn't have to. I didn't feel like I owed them anything. He watched her tuck a curl behind her ear, her movements unhurried, unguarded. You don't, he said. You never did. They rode home slow. The sun hung low behind them, casting long shadows across the ridge. Somewhere near the bend in the creek, she reached over and rested her hand on his thigh. He covered it with his own without a word. That night, she took his hand beneath the quilt and pressed it to her belly. Maybe not now, she said, but someday. He didn't speak, just kissed her shoulder and left his hand where it was, warm and still. The seasons turned steady after that. The garden grew. The barn got a new roof. She hung curtains in the kitchen and lined the shelves with dried sage, wild mint, and onion skins tied in twine bundles. Varen started carving again, buttons, drawer pulls, a thin-handled brush for her hair. One evening near the end of summer, she brought him a folded square of muslin and laid it in his lap. What's this? He asked. A name. He opened it, reading the stitched letters slowly. Varen Judd. I thought maybe, she said. If it's all right, I'd like to say it out loud at church next Sunday. He folded the fabric again, holding it in both hands. It's more than all right. Her voice went quiet. I never had anything with my name on it that wasn't a debt or a warning. Now you've got a name that means home. They married the following week. Simple, quiet, right? The preacher's wife gave Juna a sprig of lavender to tuck into her braid, and Varen shaved for the first time in months. They said their vows on the porch, the sun warm on their backs, two neighbors standing witness while the chickens clucked in the distance. At the end, when the preacher said he could kiss his bride, Varen didn't wait. He kissed her like he'd been waiting all his life. She whispered, I don't feel cursed anymore. That's because you're not, he said. Years passed like water through the creek, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always forward. They planted apple trees. They built a smokehouse. They buried an old hound beneath the cottonwoods and carved his name into stone. Their first child came in spring, a girl with lungs like thunder and hair the color of maple bark. Juna named her Elin, after her mother's mother. Varen sang to her when he split wood, his voice low and carrying across the clearing. 2 winters later, a son followed, quiet, sturdy, always watching. They named him Caleb. He learned to walk holding his sister's hand. Juna taught them to read by lamplight. Varen taught them to mend a fence, spot a broken latch, and name every star he could remember. One morning, Juna stood at the edge of the porch, her shawl wrapped tight, watching the children chase each other through the dew-wet grass. Varen stepped beside her, his hands settling on the small of her back. They're strong, she said. They've got your fire. They've got your steadiness. He looked out at the field. We did all right. She leaned into him. We did more than all right. He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You built a life here, he said. We built it, she corrected, reaching for his hand. And that was the truth. What they had wasn't owed to suffering or chance or the long dark miles that had brought them together. It was built day by day, moment by moment, with hands that mended and voices that stayed soft even when the world wasn't. In that quiet corner of Wyoming, under a sky that kept its distance only to bless what lay beneath it, they lived. Not afraid, not alone, but together, and always with love.